Great beast of the sky, please hear my cry. Transform thyself from orb of light and bring me victory in this fight. Envelop the deserts with your glow and cast your rage upon my foe. Unlock your powers from deep within so that together we may win. Appear in this shadow game as I call your name. Winged Dragon of Ra! There it is! Behold my great beast!
The Winged Dragon of Ra. In the early days of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime and manga, this thing was feared by many as the single most powerful card in the game, being in a league far above that of the other Egyptian gods. Many people wondered how these almighty behemoths would fare in the actual card game. Eventually, over the course of many years, the god cards would receive their first proper legal printings as yearly Shonen Jump promos, before becoming more easily accessible in the War of the Giants battle pack. Finally, the power of the gods could be within the palm of your hands. So, how did they fare in the actual card game? Did they wind up being almost as powerful as their anime counterparts? What kind of merit would a player receive by summoning such powerful creatures?
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Okay, that's not entirely true. Obelisk saw a bit of play here and there in regional levels due to him being a 4K beta that couldn't be targeted by the opponent's card effects, and thus making him very difficult for some decks to deal with at the time. But aside from that, the Egyptian god cards saw literally no competitive play whatsoever. As simply put, they were some of the worst cases of cards translated from the anime into the actual card game. For a better, more detailed explanation about this, I highly recommend watching DZ's video of why nobody plays the Egyptian gods. While it hasn't aged as well due to the newer support we got, it's still worth giving a watch in order to get a better understanding of their lack of power in the IRL card game. To be a bit more forgiving on them, it would be completely impossible to properly and accurately depict their power from the anime into just one card. That's where Ra wound up being an interesting case. In order to get the full experience of its anime-esque level power with its 17 trillion bloated effects, they had to split him into multiple cards and forms to the point where you have to play a dedicated deck around him in order to get the full experience. Even though one of its forms wound up being played for completely different reasons, Ra has now finally been able to get into its own league around the other Egyptian gods. But unlike its anime counterpart, it's still up for debate if he's now one of the better of the three. However, due to some new support that got revealed and released pertaining to the Ra playstyle, one may now argue if he's now at least somewhat viable. Regardless, I'll still do my very best to analyze all these cards before providing my own tidbits of advice as per usual. We begin, of course, with the original Mega Ultra Chicken himself, the Winged Dragon of Ra. Like all the Egyptian gods, it's a level 10 Divine Attribute Divine Beast type monster, which I will no longer bring up for the sake of time. Its attack and defense points are unknown and has these effects. Cannot be special summoned, requires 3 tributes to normal summon, cannot be normal set. This card's normal summon cannot be negated. When normal summoned, other cards and effects cannot be activated. When this card is normal summoned, you can pay life points so that you only have 100 left. This card gains attack and defense equal to the amount of life points paid. You can pay 1000 life points, then target one monster on the field, destroy that target. For the longest time, Ra was easily considered the worst of the 3 Egyptian gods, and it's really not hard to see why. Requiring 3 tributes to summon is something shared amongst all the god cards, with said summon being unchainable and unresponsible. But Ra is unique in being the only one to not be able to be special summoned, which in turn heavily crippled its usability or lack thereof. Plus, at a hefty life point cost of almost all of said life, would give you a big beater with no protection whatsoever, which in turn would also completely nullify the use of its other effect to pay 1000 to destroy any monster on field. It truly got the bad reputation it deserved upon arrival. However, with the newer support, this card has become more playable than before. It's still not the greatest thing around, but since it's the main centerpiece of the Ra Turbo strategy, maxing out on it is probably the best way to go about it. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Ra would continue to remain the laughingstock of the Egyptian god trio for many years, until eventually in Duelist Pack Battle City, he would finally be given a new form to further complete his full-on anime transition into the actual card game. This new form in question being the infamous Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode. Once again, its attack and defense points are unknown, but its effects are as follows. Cannot be special summoned, requires 3 tributes from either side of the field to normal summon to that side of the field, cannot be normal set. Then shift control to this card's owner during the end phase of the next turn. Cannot attack. Your opponent cannot target this card for attacks or by card effects. You contribute this card, special summon 1 the Winged Dragon of Ra from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions, and if you do, its attack and defense points become 4,000. At first glance, this seems like a niche little way of bringing out Ra without having to pay a ton of life points, while also finally being able to use its effect to destroy monsters. That was until people realized that it could tribute over the opponent's monsters in order to completely decimate their board of multiple disruptions and or negations. Sphere Mode Ra eventually began to completely warp the metagame, where people now had to be careful of setting up their board of 3 or more monsters, lest they take a golden bowling ball to the face. The main thing keeping this card back was the fact that it would eat up your normal summon for the turn, and your opponent had to deal with that sphere for their turn, potentially using it as link material in the process. Even though it wound up getting slightly more power creep with the introduction of Nibiru the Primal Being, Ra Sphere Mode still wound up being played as excellent side deck material, and even in some cases, main decked in more OTK based strategies. This golden ball has certainly gained its fair share of value over the years, and will probably not fade off the map anytime soon. It's a card that's always ran at 3, whether you're using it in main or as a side deck option. Ra's final form would arrive a year later in the Millennium Pack, finally completing its trifecta of forms used and showcased in the anime. The final form in question being the Winged Dragon of Ra Immortal Phoenix. It has 4,000 attack and defense, cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned by its own effect. If the Winged Dragon of Ra is sent from the field to your graveyard while this card is in your graveyard, special summon this card. Cards and effects cannot be activated in response to this effect's activation. Unaffected by other card effects. You can pay 1,000 life points, send 1 monster on the field to the graveyard. Once per turn during the end phase, send this card to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere Mode from your hand, deck or graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions. The huge glaring problem with this card here lies in the fact that if you decide to run this, it's a literal brick that could only be of worth when in the graveyard. And if you happen to be unlucky enough to either hard draw it or have it in your opening hand, then you better hope and pray that you can discard it quickly. Despite that though, it's a 4K behemoth whose summon can't be responded to, is immune to literally everything else, and its effect to deal with any monster neither targets or destroys, making it pretty good for problematic monsters. And while it does tag itself back into its sphere mode at the end phase, it at least helps with setting up Ra again, since the sphere can't be attacked or targeted. Should you choose to run it, then only play 1 to minimize the risk of bricking. With all the Ra forms all said and done, we can now move on to the general Egyptian god support. And while it all isn't Ra specific, I still feel obliged to talk about them regardless. And so we begin with Ra's Disciple. It's a level 4 light fairy with 1100 attack and 600 defense in this effect. When this card is summoned, you can special summon up to 2 Ra's Disciple from your hand and or deck. Cannot be tributed except for the tribute summon of Slifer the Sky Dragon, Obelisk the Tormentor, or the Winged Dragon of Ra. You cannot special summon monsters except by the effect of Ra's Disciple. How is it that a card that was once deemed unusable now can be seen as a somewhat solid option in a dedicated Ra Turbo strategy? Well, sort of. This card still has a lot of flaws. Simply controlling this thing prevents you from special summoning everything else, and since it was made in a time before Ra Sphere Mode was a thing, you couldn't use the Disciples as a tribute for Sphere Mode. It's very flawed, but then again, the same can somewhat also be said about another Ra support monster that we'll discuss soon. For now though, always max out on this card in a Ra-centered strategy, should you choose to run it. Bound of the Bound Creator is a field spell that reads, level 10 or higher monsters on the field cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. If a level 10 or higher monster on the field destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, the player who controlled the destroyed monster takes 1000 damage. When this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add one divine monster from your deck to your hand. Funnily enough, this card never really saw play in an actual Egyptian god deck, let alone a Ra Turbo build. But rather it was used in Malefics, since 3 of the archetype's strongest monsters were all level 10. And since Malefics die if there's no field spell, this card works well as giving them an extra layer of protection to boot, while also delivering a good amount of burn damage as well. Isn't that right, Paradox Dragon? In the case of an Egyptian god / Ra Turbo strategy, they tried to make it so the gods would have some additional protection, but honestly, this is something that they often don't bother running, especially with a search effect that's more often than not, slow. I personally wouldn't bother with this card, especially when taking a certain other Ra support card into account, but feel free to run only by preference. The first line of Egyptian god support ends with the normal spell, the True Name. And I gotta say, I love the artwork shown here. It's simple, but it's such a great nod to the finale of the Pharaoh's Memory arc of Duel Monsters. Great touch. Declare one card name, excavate the top card of your deck, and if it is the declared card, add it to your hand, then you can add to your hand, or special summon, one divine monster from your deck. Otherwise, send it to the graveyard. You can only activate one The True Name per turn. Well, it sure lives up to the card's name and meaning behind it all. To be honest, the only real use that this card can have is to be used in gimmickier Egyptian god decks that have you stack your deck for the right cards to call with its effect. Plus, should you choose to special summon Slifer or Obelisk if you happen to call it right, since Ra can't be special summoned outside of Sphere mode mind you, do bear in mind that those monsters will end up going to the graveyard during the end phase by their own effects. While the True Name is a nice little piece of fan service at the end of the day, I wouldn't recommend running it unless playing a more gimmickier version of Ra Turbo. 4 years later, after Immortal Phoenix and the True Name arrived, we would finally get more support for the Egyptian gods, mostly tailored for Ra, in Duelist Pack Duelist of Gloom, where it was featured alongside Mechlords and Jinzo. Each of these themes wound up getting 7 new support cards, with Marek's Ra playstyle also utilizing his slime monsters that he used in his duel against Yugi, while mind-controlling strings to bring out Slifer, while Ra was nowhere to be seen or even heard of. What? Anyways, the Ra theme support begins with Reactor Slime, a level 4 water aqua monster with 500 attack and defense in this effect. During your main phase, you can special summon 2 slime tokens, level 1 water aqua monsters with 500 attack and defense. Also, you cannot normal or special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except divine beast monsters. During the battle phase, quick effect, you contribute this card, set 1 Metal Reflect Slime directly from your hand, deck or graveyard to your spell and trap zone. Also, it can be activated this turn. You can only use each effect of Reactor Slime once per turn. As for its mentioning of Metal Reflect Slime, it's an early trap monster that summons itself as a level 10 Water Aqua monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense, where this effect is only here to help summon out a certain fusion monster, and also because of Reflect Slime's use in the final Yugi vs Marek duel. As for Reactor Slime itself, it's pretty good for its intended purpose. I'm also glad that its token spawning effect restricts you from making massive plays, especially where link spam is concerned. It gets you your tribute fodder for your Egyptian god Lickety Split, and combined with a certain other support card, it works out very well. Plus, unlike Ra's Disciple, your summoning restrictions can apply whenever you feel like activating the effect, and not just while you control the monster. However, since both itself and the tokens have less stats than Disciples, and the fact that Reactor Slime doesn't do as much deck thinning than Disciple, use of this card over the other 3 followers also boils down to personal preference. Guardian Slime is a level 10 Water Aqua monster with 0 attack and defense in this effect. If you take battle or effect damage, you can special summon this card from your hand. During damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can have this card gain defense equal to that opponent's monster's attack during that damage calculation only. If this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can add 1 spell or trap that specifically lists the Winged Dragon of Ra in its text from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Guardian Slime once per turn. This was so close to being the perfect searcher for the Ra Turbo strategy, but completely blew it with the fact that you only got the search effect if sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, and not when sent there in general. But aside from that, it's pretty good. The fact that you can special summon it whenever you take any kind of damage gives the deck an additional lifeline if unlucky enough to go first, since its defense boosting effect, while only working once for that turn, can also keep your life points safe for you to hopefully have enough to give to Ra. On top of that, it has the perfect level, type, and stats to help go into a certain fusion monster for additional plays. Again though, the search effect conditions could have been much better, but I'm not going to complain any further at this point. Do me a favor and run 3 of this. Concerning this fusion monster I keep bringing up, it was used with Metal Reflect Slime and Revival Jam in Marik's final duel in order to perfect his ultimate wall before getting Ra back onto the field. This ultimate wall is Egyptian God Slime, and holy mother of Ra, this thing was horrifically awful in the anime. I'll just leave you some time to read these anime effects before talking about the real card. Alright, time's up. Now while you recover from the atrocity that you just read, here's the better version of God Slime. It's a level 10 Water Aqua fusion monster with 3000 attack and defense, requires an Aqua monster and a level 10 Water monster to summon, but there's another way to bypass this. Must first be either fusion summoned or special summoned from your extra deck by tributing one level 10 Aqua monster with 0 attack. This card can be used as 3 tributes for a tribute summon. Cannot be destroyed by battle. Your opponent cannot target monsters you control with card effects, except Egyptian God Slime. Also, their monsters cannot target monsters for attacks, except Egyptian God Slime. Now this is how you adapt an anime card into the actual card game. Not only does it have relatively easy summoning requirements, but it also provides us an excellent wall to boot. 3000 both ways is nothing to scoff at either, especially when put in a monster that can't be destroyed by battle and prevents your opponent from targeting your other monsters as well. Sure, it's no Beelzebub of the Diabolic Dragons in terms of destruction protection, but what we got is still very much legitimate. Plus, it counts as all 3 tributes for your Egyptian god, so you can just stall out with this thing as long as you need to, or until you decide when the time's right to bring out your god card using this thing alone. If you somehow can't max out on God Slime due to extra deck space, then running 2 would be your next safest bet. The new wave of spell and trap support starts with the normal spell, Ancient Chant. And since you already heard the Marik chant at the start of this video, I feel obliged to also play a Thames version of the chant to set the mood.
Almighty protector of the sun and sky, I beg of thee, please heed my cry. Transform thyself from orb of light and bring me victory in this fight. I beseech thee, grace our humble game, but first I shall call out thy name, Winged Dragon of Ra! Behold the 3rd Egyptian god!
Okay, honestly, I just wanted an excuse to play both versions of the chant. Anyway, back to the topic of the card itself. Add 1 the Winged Dragon of Ra from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and if you do, during your main phase this turn, you can tribute summon 1 monster in addition to your normal summon or set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. You can banish this card from your graveyard. If you tribute summon the Winged Dragon of Ra this turn after you resolve this effect, its original attack and defense become the combined original attack and defense of the monsters tributed for its tribute summon. You can only activate 1 Ancient Chant per turn. Seriously, why wasn't this second effect a part of the original printing of Ra? Not only does it search out your win condition, and not only does it get you an additional tribute summon for the turn, but it also helps fix the huge problem Ra had in being able to pay life points to destroy monsters when you already paid almost all of them to boost Ra's stats. Yeah, Sphere Mode also helped fix this glaring issue, but you pretty much had to wait a turn in order to do so if summoning it to your opponent's field. But putting that aside, this is easily the best support card one could ever ask for in a Ra Turbo strategy. Never play any less than 3. Millennium Revelation is a continuous spell which has the following effect. You can send 1 Divine Beast monster from your hand to the graveyard, add 1 Monster Reborn from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can send this face-up card from your spell and trap zone to the graveyard. This turn, you can special summon the Winged Dragon of Ra from your graveyard with Monster Reborn, ignoring summoning conditions, but send it to the graveyard during the end phase of this turn. You can only use each effect of Millennium Revelation once per turn. Having the ability to search one of the best generic spell cards in the game is honestly brilliant, but the problem lies in the fact that you must discard an Egyptian god in order to do so. I understand why, because of overbloated anime things, but that doesn't mean I can't criticize it for that reason. Plus, since you'll have summoned Ra from the graveyard this way, you won't be able to get its effect off of boosting its attack stats to super high levels outside of a couple other cards very soon down the line. Alternatively, you could just wait for Ra to die at the end phase in order to bring out the Phoenix, where the Phoenix would then tag back out into the Sphere mode, thus completing the Ra cycle for your next turn. Because of this decent first turn strategy, I would advise running Millennium Revelation at no less than 2. Next up is Ra's signature attack, Blaze Cannon. This card version of the signature attack is a quick play spell and is always treated as a Blaze Accelerator card. Actually, the reasoning for this is pretty understandable. You see, Blaze Accelerator in the OCG is indeed called Blaze Cannon, and Ra's attack in Japan is dubbed God Blaze Cannon. And since it has the same pronunciation in kanji as the Blaze Accelerator cards, this technically makes Blaze Cannon actual volcanic support, so take that with a grain of salt. As for the effect itself, choose one the Winged Dragon of Ra you control, and it gains these effects until the end of this turn. This card's activation and effect cannot be negated. Unaffected by your opponent's card effects. When an attack is declared involving this card, you contribute any number of other monsters that did not declare an attack this turn. This card gains attack equal to the tributed monster's combined original attack until the end of this turn. After damage calculation, if this card attacked, you can send all monsters your opponent controls to the graveyard. Oh boy, talk about absurd. Not only does it make your Ra almost invincible for the whole turn, but it also gives the beast another method of OTKing by using all of your other monsters as sacrifices to further power up its attack. And if your opponent somehow managed to survive that attack, you could just nuke their entire board of monsters on the off chance, which by the way, doesn't target or destroy. The only issue I have is that the card isn't spell speed 4, but considering that it already can't be negated, this is honestly nitpicking at this point. Blaze Cannon is truly ridiculous if pulled off at the right time, making it very much a staple in the Ra Turbo strategy, and I feel that running any less than 2 would be blasphemous to the Golden Chicken himself. The final Ra support card from DP24 is the continuous trap, One with the Sun God. If you control a monster whose original name is the Winged Dragon of Ra, you can activate this card during the turn it was set. During the main phase, you can pay life points so that you only have 100 left. One special summon, the Winged Dragon of Ra you control gains attack and defense equal to the amount of life points paid. Once per turn, you contribute one the Winged Dragon of Ra, gain life points equal to the attack it had on the field. You cannot activate these effects in the same chain. This was meant to use in conjunction with Millennium Revelation's effect involving Monster Reborn, but in reality, it gives Sphere Mode an unneeded but very welcome buff. On top of that, it can replenish your life by tributing your copy of Ra should you happen to find yourself at the razor's edge, especially when playing against burn strategies. Plus, if you also happen to have the Phoenix engraved, you can effortlessly pull off the complete Ra cycle of tributing Ra, reviving the Phoenix, then bringing out the Sphere to go back into the OG Ra. Don't get me wrong, this card can often be quite circumstantial, but seeing how easy it is to pull off, it's still worth running at least 2. Now's the part where I try to cover Ra's strengths and weaknesses, with heavy emphasis on the word try. Cause in honesty, Ra is a central card with other multiple support cards revolving around it, which is something that's a bit tougher to narrow down strengths and weaknesses than in comparison to an archetype. But if I still had to mention the key strengths and weaknesses of a Ra-centered strategy, then the first thing I'd bring up is its ability to easily one-shot the opponent, especially where the new support is concerned. Ra is always designed for OTKs in mind, and while Sphere Mode definitely helped with that further, it's only with the newer support that really makes it so much easier to accomplish. And speaking of sphere mode, the Ra strategy is pretty good when it comes to breaking boards, whereby going second every game is almost guaranteed you an easy victory. Ra Turbo is good with that, but the Blind Go's second version of Ra excels in destroying boards and netting you the win. But of course, Ra isn't without its inherent flaws. For one thing, since Ra is the centerpiece of the deck, it turns the playstyle into a defend a castle kind of game, thus making the deck extremely linear and predictable where its combo game is concerned. And I use the term combo game very loosely in the context of Ra, since your main win condition after all is a level 10 monster that normally needs 3 tributes in order to be summoned. Another big issue the playstyle has is consistency. Outside of Guardian Slime and Ancient Chant, a typical Ra deck has very few ways of thinning through said deck outside of splashing in a few danger monsters. So 7 times out of 10 you will wind up bricking more often than you are breaking boards. And while the board breaking is good, it's only really good against decks that love to summon a whole bunch. So unless you're running solid back row removal as well, then you're not gonna have a lot of fun against decks that don't like summoning a lot, specifically the control decks. The last and most key issue the playstyle has is with Ra itself. It's all about paying life points to either boost its attack or to destroy monsters, so you'll easily wind up on the end of the chopping block in terms of life points. And all it'll usually take is that tiny bit of burn damage to end the game right there and then. Plus, the cycle of Ra can often be rather tricky to properly pull off, since should you still decide to run Immortal Phoenix, you run the risk of drawing into a literal brick that you can't normally get into the graveyard from the hand. And on top of that, the original Ra has no protection to speak of outside of Blaze Cannon, which only further cements Ra as a defend the castle kind of playstyle for the worse. As I alluded to earlier, there are 2 ways to play a Ra deck. There's the standard Ra Turbo build or the Blind Go second version. But I feel that no matter which version you'll be playing, you should still be able to splash in a few danger monsters. Consistency isn't the greatest in the world when it comes to Ra decks, so throwing in a few dangers not only helps with a bit of draw power, but also with adding a bit more field presence. Additionally, Pot of Desires will also be your standard draw card. Often you'll need to get your sphere mode back quickly to actually get to Ra itself. So I also recommend using cards like Owner's Seal or Remove Brainwashing to lower the risk of your opponent using your sphere mode as link material. These also work especially well in the Blind Go second variant. If you really want to make sure you have enough life points to give to Ra, then a spicy tech option of Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood might also be worth considering. With a simple discard during either turn, you'll gain life equal to the attack of any and all monsters your opponent ends up special summoning that turn. And though it comes at the risk of you losing half your life points if your opponent doesn't special summon that turn, what's life like without taking a little bit of risks? And of course, should your opponent still somehow be living at the end of Ra's attacks, you can just do everything you can to bring out another level 10 monster to go into Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max for that 2k burn damage for game. I mean, Ra Turbo already has a good number of level 10s to begin with, so you can't really go wrong there. As for the Blind Go second variant, you'll be doing everything in your power to completely decimate the opponent's quote-unquote unbreakable board. Here you'll be utilizing Kaijus and Lava Golem to get rid of every monster the opponent has, while also bringing them back with the previously mentioned Owner's Seal or Remove Brainwashing to get to your OTK. While this version isn't as focused on Ra as the Turbo strategy, it's still a fun little way to completely mess with the best decks. Just try to make sure you save up on those lightning storms while you're at it. To say that the Egyptian god cards left a solid impact on the early Yu-Gi-Oh fanbase and casual players would be an understatement. But if one were to say back in 2012 that Ra would end up being the best of the 3 gods in the actual card game, they'd probably be met with laughing and humiliation. The Winged Dragon of Ra itself is quite an interesting case of starting off as nothing worth talking about, to something that even a board of infinite negates has nightmares about. Which, now that I think about it, makes perfect sense coming from the user of Ra that loves to put his victims in horrific shadow games with the sole purpose of mentally and physically torturing them. Only fitting that this would wind up being the case for such a fan favorite card like Ra. And though he wound up being successful for all the wrong reasons, it's those same reasons why I now feel that he truly deserves the title of the strongest Egyptian god. Hey everyone, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I intentionally put this video off for the sake of waiting for all the support cards from DP24 to be revealed before ultimately beginning the full scripting and editing process. And trust me when I say that I cannot wait for all this new support to finally arrive in the TCG. Anyways, if you liked this video, then please consider subscribing or following me on Twitter using the link found in the description. Up next will be the 101 database on Dragon Maids, and let's just hope that one doesn't take me too long to put together. Until next time, this is Mr. Orichalcos, signing out.